it used to be considered an honour to get an invitation to visit the President of the United States at the White House. Now, it's kind of like your name coming up in the ballot to take part in the Hunger Games, which is another way of saying that the President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, got to follow in President Zelensky's footsteps this week when he went for a meeting with President Trump. He at least went in knowing that he might be walking into a trap, having witnessed, along with the rest of the world, the pretty wrenching struggle session that saw Zelensky eventually ejected from the White House. After all, he would have been aware that Elon Musk had been circulating disinformation specifically about supposed white genocide in South Africa. He would have known as well that Trumpland was stirred into excitement just days previously with the symbolic welcoming of a few dozen white South Africans claiming asylum from their country. Strangely enough, a group that was not welcomed on entry by ICE operatives to lock them up, interrogate them for weeks on end before turning them around and sending them on their way. So it may well be that preparedness was the main reason why, when Trump duly ambushed him with the showing of a video that purported to provide evidence of mass deaths amongst white farmers, he kept his cool. As a result, he came through the ordeal generally with his dignity intact. Some in the South African press were praising him for keeping his composure in the face of such an insult and assault. Others slated his delegation for being apparently too passive in the face of the disinformation that was put forward. I imagine the delegation had agreed in advance that becoming defensive and angry would be exactly the way to end up in the Zelensky position. I rather suspect they would have been right. Now let's step back from the claims that the MAGA machine put forward and just get real for a moment about the actual situation in South Africa, because it is a country in a pretty unhappy state right now. And any of this could legitimately have been a focus for discussion between the two leaders, although why you choose to do that in front of cameras, well, that's a specific choice that we can come back to. South Africa is in desperate straits economically. Unemployment is huge, around 32% of working age adults out of work, and a massive, truly bewildering amount of youngsters between the age of 15 to 24, 60% unemployed. Unsurprising then, the country has chronic poverty and extreme inequality, and all of the things that come from that situation are therefore to be found in abundance. Corruption is endemic, with South Africa dropping to its lowest ever score recently on the Corruption Perception Index. The government, the ANC, which has seen its support erode over many years, is known mainly for consistently ineffective and kleptocratic leadership. It has seen years of mismanagement of essential infrastructure, including electricity, rail, water, that has seen regular power outages hitting businesses, healthcare institutions, and the economy generally. Unsurprisingly, as a result of all that, public trust in government is at rock bottom. And one of the biggest daily issues for citizens, sky-high crime rates, including violent crime, murders, robberies, violence specifically against women, xenophobia and violence against migrants. All of these are at high levels across the country, and that is the real-life problem that has the biggest overlap with what the president put forward in the White House. Now, farmers have been one group amongst many that have been hit by such incidents of violence. So, for instance, one video that was shared on Twitter in support of President Trump's case was of this. Now, it wasn't identified, but the smallest amount of research identifies it as the Wall of Remembrance that was erected by the Henneman Farmers Union. Now, in spite of the implication of a number of those who shared this online, suggesting that it was all the names of white farmers who had recently been killed in a slaughter of genocide proportions, actually it's in memory of all farmers and workers who have been killed in violence since the 31st of May 1961. It's not solely made up of victims of one race. Since it commemorates farmers, workers and their family, quite a number of those will have been black. Even during the height of apartheid, when black citizens were not allowed to own and run farms, they nevertheless made up quite a high proportion of the workers who laboured on them. The website for the memorial lists the names that are on the monument. In the most recent years, new additions have numbered between 25 and 41 people. So you can look at that and you can see the farming end of this wider problem of routine violence in the country. And that is a problem that shouldn't be minimised. South Africa is the country with the 5th highest homicide rate per capita in the world, and the 3rd highest if you discount 2 very small countries that made that list. It only trails Jamaica and Ecuador on that scale. So yes, that is a problem. Unfortunately, this being the age of stupid, we don't get to see what's supposed to be the leader of the free world discussing that problem, whether from a position of sympathy and wanting to help, God forbid, or criticism of the current regime. Way more likely. No, instead we have to grapple with conspiracy theories that say there is a white genocide going on specifically against white farmers. The problem is that reacting to that, you look at the basis of the claims and the source of them, you end up in a discussion that starts with the basic fact that they're not true, but which can then make it sound as though you're arguing there's no problem at all. Hence why I've ordered this video the way that I have, because yes, again, South Africa has huge problems. It's just not the one that Trump represented. So what did Trump show? He showed a video that accurately showed the political leader of a minority party that is not in government leading a song that talks about killing the Boer, the white farmers. Julius Malema of the Economic Freedom Fighters. If circumstances were different, Trump and J.D. Vance might quite like him because he's something of a populist. But in a violent country, populism very quickly and easily goes to the logical conclusion of dehumanising the other side, i.e. celebrating the idea of violence against them. So that is a thing that happened. In case you weren't aware, South Africa came out of a long period of history where the black majority population had been subjected to the most brutal racist state in recent history. Nelson Mandela was the inspirational leader who could emerge after decades in jail and declare that the country was going to have truth and reconciliation, to come together rather than to have one side take over and decide now it's their turn to oppress the others. But human beings like Nelson Mandela are exceptional. So yeah, there's quite a few that have not been so big in the forgiving and forgetting. Such changes take decades to become imbued in the national consciousness. For many countries, it can be centuries. You have to normalise tolerance day after day. You have to confront calls to violence day after day. I mean, the United States still bears some emotional scars of its own from history. It's hard not to notice. It takes a long time for a deeply divided society to become just one. So yeah, some people sang a bad song. Singing songs, of course, does not constitute genocide. You have to be able to show that people were moved from that to actually take action. The only evidence presented for that was the same sort of garbage evidence that you see every day on Twitter. Some random piece of video which the poster tells you what the context is that gives it meaning. And you can very quickly ascertain that while the video definitely shows a thing, the context added to it by the poster is just a lie. Like, for example, the video during COVID that purported to show that supposed victims of the virus were actually just pretending to be dead because, look, you can see one of them moved. But of course that wasn't COVID at all, it was an environmental die-in protest. Or the video purporting to show voting boxes being tampered with, but ultimately show, of course, nothing of the sort. How much do we have to see that sort of garbage getting debunked time after time after time before people get hold of the idea that you don't trust the words in the tweet to tell you what's happening in the video? Well, kind of depends on how much you want to believe what they say or not, as always. In this case, my understanding is there was a funeral procession for a pair of farmers who had been killed, and there were white crosses that had been added along the route in tribute to them and to other farmers, much like the wall of remembrance that I showed a few minutes ago. But if you show that clip and then claim all those crosses are the permanent resting sites of exclusively white farmers who've recently all been killed, hence why they're all new crosses, then obviously it becomes much more sinister. And that was what President Trump had been told, and as we know, once President Trump gets an idea in his head, no amount of debunking is ever really going to remove it. The Twitter poster who made the claim has a channel that is basically full of exactly the same sort of claims about all sorts of things, but mostly to do with race baiting of one sort or another. And yet, we have the most powerful world leader taking that as a credible source regardless, because a country in decline can just be stupid like that. So look, we could just take all of this as, yes, another example of Trump mayhem, how embarrassing for the United States, etc., etc. But I would push this event higher in the significance table, because of the fact this has now become a habit, and also because of who they did it to. Whereas before, you could have told yourself that what happened to President Zelensky was very specific to his situation, Ukraine having been the recipient of large amounts of military aid under Trump's hated predecessor. Now you have to conclude this is part of the MAGA operating system. Trump will be obsequious and deferential to certain world leaders, the ones he admires, or at least who have money that he admires. Vladimir Putin will not have to endure a struggle session like this, not that he'd ever agree to put himself in that position anyway. The King of Saudi Arabia, never going to happen to him. But MAGA can end up picking on countries for a number of reasons, mostly to do with taking steps to prevent far-right ideologies from taking control of their countries and dismantling their democracies, as well as anything that could be taken as being punitive against white people. Also, being a successful economic rival to the United States, almost certainly in there as well. Failing to bend the knee in the face of tariffs, or demands that you allow yourself to be annexed by the United States. That sort of dreadful behaviour would also count. So if I were the German Chancellor, for instance, I would be very wary of participating in an Oval Office gladiatorial contest. The Danish PM? Yeah, wouldn't recommend that either. President Macron got away with it once, but if Marine Le Pen gets confirmed as banned from standing in the next election, well, it could go very differently next time. Japan and South Korea should certainly avoid the White House, given the Asian premium on saving face and their relative economic success. It's just not worth the risk. China's Xi Jinping, of course, will never accept an invitation to take part in this sort of circus, even though I bet Trump probably wouldn't dare to do it to him. You wouldn't expect him to take the chance. If those two do meet, I dare say they will at some point, it won't be at the Oval Office in front of journalists and MAGA-friendly podcasters. And then think about who they did this to, who they tried to embarrass this time. South Africa, one of the leading BRICS countries, and one which has been criticised by some for equivocating on the Ukraine war, being one of 35 countries that abstained from a United Nations vote that condemned Russia immediately after the invasion took place. Precisely because South Africa doesn't want to alienate itself from Russia or from China. Think about all the other BRICS leaders watching that. If you wanted to add fire to their belly in seeking to replace the hegemony of the United States, well, way to go about it. It's as though Trump just hasn't noticed yet that his earlier actions have tended to have consequences that he didn't end up enjoying. You know, uniting Canadians against him and any election candidate who vaguely resembles him politically, for example. Hitting China with egregious tariffs and then demanding that they should back down and bend the knee when they respond. Another example. And of course, no, by all accounts, he's incapable of learning such lessons, and so it is. So now his circus has established itself as a major adversary to any and all leaders who might be considering being hosted there. Never mind the courtesy a host owes to an invited guest. These people are barbarians. Such niceties mean nothing to them. Alternatively, they can go to China, where they will be doubtless treated with respect, at least in the public part of the events, because that's normal. And China is, of course, especially keen right now to demonstrate to the world how much more agreeable dealing with them would be than dealing with the US. So needless to say, the Chinese state media gleefully reported Ramaphosa's ordeal in this case. After reporting how the attacks made by the president had been shown to be false many times over the years, it then ended with this contextual point. South Africa is slated to host the Group of 20 G20 gathering later this year of the world's largest economies, but the US leaders' frustration with Ramaphosa's government has raised the possibility that the US could boycott the event. This would certainly be China's fondest dream. The Washington Post had already reported that the Trump administration has banned all government agencies from doing any work on the forthcoming G20 summit, and it did indeed attribute the reason for that ban being rooted in Trump's beliefs in a white genocide in South Africa. Trump had, after all, said as much on a tweet posted over a month ago. How could we be expected to go to South Africa for the very important G20 meeting when land confiscation and genocide is the primary topic of conversation? They are taking the land of white farmers and then killing them and their families. The media refuses to report on this. Now look, the mainstream media has much to answer for, I agree. They suppressed reporting on the Hunter Biden laptop story, for instance, which was a real story and very arguably in the public interest. Yes, they have been guilty of all sorts of selective reporting, depending on their political bias, a game that both sides have played from time to time, but mostly they also care about relatively factual reporting. And I'm willing to bet the main reason they haven't touched this story with a barge pole is on account of it being total bollocks. Anyway, if Trump genuinely thinks the G20 will be important, I expect he will change his mind about attending. If he doesn't, nobody will be better pleased than Xi Jinping. China has been on a decade-long charm offensive across the continent of Africa and, of course, with other BRICS countries. This latest incident adds strength to those efforts. Now, does Trump realise that? Well, what do you think? There's no major ongoing conflict involved here, unlike with President Zelensky, so expect the media to have largely forgotten and moved on from this event within a few days. But you can take this for granted. No leader of any country across the world is going to forget this. The United States has entered a new level of degradation in how it is viewed by the rest of the world. And that really is a choice it freely made, but is going to come back to bite it in many ways in the future. Such is the way of things. When it happens, they will be astonished, they will be hurt, they will have no idea how they sowed the seeds in the first place in the Oval Office that day, with the whole world watching as they did so.